I worked just shy of 40 years, but my pension still wasn't going to be enough for us. So when he called out of the blue, offering a free pension review, I was all ears. He spoke professionally about investments. He seemed a really decent guy. Just shy of 40 years, pension. He took all of it.
Cristo on Talk Radio.
And as Mike does every Monday at this time, let's now talk to the man with the column on the Mail on Sunday. I'm disappointed. I might agree with a lot of what he's got to say today, and I've always wanted to argue a little bit with this gentleman, but we do actually agree on a lot of things that he's got to say today. I think it is, of course, Peter Hitchens, who joins us live here on Talk Radio. Morning to you, Peter.
Good morning.
Lovely to have your company. Lovely to talk to you for the first time. Thank you. Now, I think it would be wrong to not actually start by discussing where we are with Plan B, not to Plan B. A lot of the Sunday newspapers were saying that, some of them were saying, scientists are saying that we must be in Plan B and that we're insane not to be. Rishi Sunak saying, well, no, we don't need to be because we've got these booster jabs. My point is, I don't understand why no one, journalists or anyone else, is asking the Health Secretary how on earth the NHS hasn't made arrangements to be prepared for this so that we had enough beds, so that we have the capacity.
Well, the first problem with the NHS, which came up during the original panic period, is that, and there's a very interesting paper prepared by the King's Fund, which anybody can read about this, is that the NHS has been short of beds for a very long time as a result of deliberate policy. It cut back on the number of beds, decided it would run much closer to capacity. That's what it does. And it's one of the many reasons why the National Health Service, which amazingly some people still believe to be the envy of the world, is constantly in crisis. And every winter, particularly, it enters a period of crisis. And when people say the NHS is going to be overwhelmed, I think you'll find quite a lot of people falling ill at the moment who would say that it was already overwhelmed, waiting for hours for ambulances to come, waiting when the ambulances do come, waiting in queues outside hospitals to get into hospitals. And this before any particular outbreak of winter illness, because the NHS simply is not very well run and it doesn't have very good capacity for this kind of thing, despite the immense sums of money which are spent on it all the time. And we're constantly told it's being cut back, but the fact is it is year after year after year after year, more and more money is put into it. So the reason cannot be the amount of money. It has to have something to do with the way it's organised. I do think it's time we stop worshipping the NHS. I do think it's time we looked at our neighbours on the continent who often have better health services than we do, in my experience and the experience of friends and acquaintances of mine who've been ill over there, and indeed of the French themselves. So, for instance, the French National Health Service does not anymore have wards. Anybody who goes into a French hospital goes into a private room, which seems to me to be a basic starting point for recovering from illness. We haven't achieved it. They got rid of wards years ago. Why haven't we done that? There are so many things that need to be said, but it's such a sacred organisation that any serious discussion of it is immediately put down as a sort of sacrilege. And I just think we should be much more open to discussing how it is actually organised and whether it's doing the job it ought to do. One has to put in here the obvious thing. The people who work for the NHS, and many of us have been rescued by the NHS, I myself, from a bad road accident, and I'm very grateful for the skill and swiftness of the care we got. But that doesn't mean that because we had a good experience, that cancels out the bad experiences other people are having. And we shouldn't allow ourselves to be silenced or to silence ourselves. That's the first thing on any NHS discussion that needs to be said. It's not as good as we like to think it is.
And a lot of our friends on the continent, they have systems, don't they, where you can choose the kind of care you want. You can choose the hospital you go to, and that brings in that word that I think people who love the NHS have complete horror when they hear it, and that is the sort of competitive nature of it. But that actually does improve services for patients. Now, I don't know, I'm not an expert, I don't know if that's going to actually solve things, but what I find frustrating, and it sounds like you do as well, is that whenever you even will mention that, go near that sort of word, people seem to have some sort of meltdown about it.
Well, there is a reasonable fear. People say, well, what we don't want to do is to copy the American system. And I agree completely with that. I lived in the United States for 2 years some time ago, and I lived very near a hospital, and I went down to check out what actually happened there. And in fact, in many ways, despite being fantastically expensive and requiring appallingly high levels of insurance to use it, it wasn't actually much more efficient than an NHS hospital. And the United States also does have a public healthcare system, but it's so heavily means tested that people really have to go through perhaps 60 or 70 pages of form filling before they can use that. Emergencies, contrary to myth, are treated. You don't have a credit card if you need an emergency, but nonetheless, it's not a good system. But it's not the only other way of organising a health service. There are many, many others. Canada has a reasonably successful so-called single-payer system. And as I say, Germany and France and I believe Spain do quite well. I just think we should stop closing our minds to the possibility of reform. I'm not so sure about the choice of hospital or anything else. There are, in fact, the policy of the past many years in this country of concentrating hospitals, having large district hospitals rather than lots and lots of small ones, would make that quite difficult. But I do think that it would be possible to provide a service, especially at the enormous cost that the NHS is actually bearing down on the population of this country, that would be better than one we have. And I do also dislike the constant assumption that because it's free at the point of use, it's free. We pay, all of us, however well off or poorly off we are, we all pay a very great amount of tax towards the NHS. It's not free at all.
And there will now be a national insurance rise. We heard last week that councils are asking to be able to put up their council tax as well as a precept towards social care. We're hearing today about the NHS getting this £6 billion budget boost. That's our money, by the way. I think all of that justifies conversations about what we do going forward. All of it does. Yeah.
But that's all I asked for. And I think that the Labour Party for many years pretended that it was the only friend of the NHS and the Tories were dedicated to destroying it, which wasn't true. And the Tories have now sort of reversed that. So, no, the NHS belongs to us now. We are the party that safeguards the NHS. I do think that it should be depoliticised from that point of view. And also I think whatever changes are made, they should be made with great care so they last. Because a huge amount of damage has been done to the NHS over the past 20 years by repeated reorganisations, which have not, in my view, helped very much and in some cases have harmed. It shouldn't be a constant construction site, but there should be a really serious bipartisan, non-political re-examination of how it works and how it should work.
OK, listen, when we come back, I want to talk about some of the other things in your column over the weekend, especially what you were saying about David Amess and the fact that many people who, and I'm not a religious person in the slightest, but a lot of people were saying that the fact that, yourself included, the fact that he was denied the last rites is an absolutely abhorrent decision. And we'll dissect some of that and lots more besides coming up right here. It's Talk Radio.
This is Talk Radio.
Across the UK, online, on DAB+, and on the Talk Radio app. Cristo
on Talk Radio.
Good morning. I'm keeping the seat warm for Mike Graham, still joined by the Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens, talking us through some of the big stories, especially those in his column. Now, Peter, I'm not remotely religious. I don't get it. I've never really got it. And, that is where I stand on it. However, I completely agree with what you had to say in your column this weekend about how outrageous it was and just how cruel it was that David Amess was denied the right to have the last rites, when clearly to him, a dying man, that would have been something so special to him, something so comforting to him. And I don't even think you need to be remotely religious to understand that.
Well, absolutely you don't. The whole point of living in a tolerant society is that I have to accept that you have your religious opinions and you have to accept that I have mine, and that we both try to rub along by making as much allowance for that as possible. In the case of Sir David Amess and his family, they're members of the Roman Catholic faith, which believes very strongly that it is a good thing, I think to put it mildly, that there should be a priest present at your final moments. And here was a priest who was willing to go to Sir David in what may have been his final moments. We don't actually know whether he was still alive at the time. But rather than saying, yes, of course, which would seem to me to be the civilized response of anybody if offered this kind of spiritual comfort to somebody everybody knew to be a member of that faith, the police said a bureaucratic no, sorry, we referred it upwards, no, we can't have the crime scene contaminated, which of course sounds very persuasive in this age when everybody's a crime scene expert and we constantly watch television programs about cold cases and how the DNA can find out that people are guilty of things they don't appear to be guilty of. But the truth is, I didn't accept this excuse, and I asked if anybody could come up with any instance, any occasion, when a priest had ever been even accused of contaminating a crime scene, and nobody could. In fact, the only occasion when I can't have anybody being accused of this was paramedics being accused of contaminating a crime scene after a very nasty attack on someone in Shoreham by Sea, and the accusation was made in court. Nothing came of it. The person was convicted and sent to prison for a very long time, and the case proceeded as before. So I just don't think this is a real reason. I think it's just the kind of excuse that people come up with when they want to say no. And I think that 20 or 30 years ago, police officers would have treated religion with more respect. I think this is a society in which religion is treated with less and less respect.
Why could they not have
particularly the Christian religion, I have to say.
I'll get to that in just a moment, but I don't understand why they couldn't have taken the DNA and fibre samples and anything that they needed from the priest. So that after the priest had given the last rites, hand over his DNA samples, hand over any fibre samples, hand over his fingerprints, anything else. And if that had been explained to him, look, you're going to have to do that if we're going to let you on the scene, why that couldn't have then happened to have then eliminated
Well, of course, the priest would have said yes. And we have the example of Roman Catholic padres in the First World War, particularly, who went right into the battle, in the middle of the battle to give extreme unction to dying soldiers. They regard it as one of their most important duties, and I've no doubt he would have done that. But it wasn't even raised.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. But the thing is, it's all to do with this diminishing respect in this country, particularly, oddly enough, in government and the law for the Christian religion, which is not really counted as being very important anymore. And it's a very big change in our society, and I think sometimes it's just pure indifference. And sometimes it's hostility, but I think
do you believe that he would have been denied entry had it been another faith? Because I think that's the $1 million question here. If it'd been of another faith that was a non-Christian faith, would that person who was religious, a religious leader, have been denied entry?
It's a very interesting question, one which I don't think we can speculate on. Let's see what happens. In fact, the provisions of most other faiths don't create, as far as I know, any such position of urgency anyway. So it probably wouldn't arise. I think there is, beyond doubt, because Christianity in this country used to be as it were, the official religion, and now no longer is. It gets pushed down quite firmly by officials these days, as if to emphasise you're not in charge anymore. Because after the Equality Act of 2010, the official state religion in this country is equality and diversity, and all religions have to be treated the same. And that is the rule. And that, of course, it sounds great, but if the country was formally Christian, then obviously it means a big step down to the Christian religion. Also, I think, and I'm very much a Protestant, I think that there is a vestigial anti-Catholicism in our culture as well, which might play some role, but I would think much more likely what was going on was pure indifference, that the people involved in making the decision didn't really care and didn't see that, since it wasn't important to them, they didn't see it was important to others.
No, I think it's fear as well. I think that there would have been a fear that had they taken the initiative to do that, they would have been blamed for contaminating the scene. And I think that's because people are jobsworths nowadays and they're worried about those sorts of things rather than perhaps having some common sense and compassion. So I wondered, when I read your column, I wondered whether a family member, say his wife had turned up at that point and he was in his final moments, would they have allowed her in? And I would think they probably would have.
Well, it's an interesting question, isn't it? And one, I don't know. But I agree that a society, an organisation such as the modern police, who are fantastically bureaucratic, it is an organisation in which people are very, very unwilling to take decisions without referring them upwards. This is basically caricatured in the Soviet Union, where you couldn't get anyone to decide anything ever. Nobody would. Everything had to go up to the top. And that was catastrophic. Decisions simply didn't get taken. But yeah, sure, bureaucracy played a part in it. But I just think that if you'd had a comparable situation 20 or 30 years ago, I think there would have been an automatic respect for a man of the cloth, which has completely disappeared. Our society has changed from a society in which Christianity was a declining but respected religion to a society in which religion is by and large held in either indifference or contempt. And that is a big change in the way that we all live and behave and think. And we will feel the effects of it on lots of other things apart from this.
Yeah, I don't mind contempt as long as they're all equally contemptible and all equally taken the mickey out of, but I don't feel that happens. I think you're right. I think that people are more comfortable parodying and criticising Christianity over all the other faiths, and I don't think that that's particularly fair, to be honest. Let's just, in our final moments, talk about Bill Clinton. I hadn't realised, Peter, that you had been so involved in the pretty lurid claims about Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky and Paula Jones, who was the woman who originally accused Bill Clinton of being quite inappropriate with her. But you were right in the centre of the story.
Well, I went back in the middle 90s when I was living and working in Washington, D.C. I expected to be writing a lot about politics, and then I suddenly found that there was the Troopergate allegations, where some former bodyguards of Mr. Clinton, when he was governor of Arkansas, came forward and made various allegations about him. And out of this came Paula Jones, who told the extraordinary story of how he invited her up to his hotel room and made various suggestions to her, which she didn't accept. And as I say, to this day, I couldn't, on a family newspaper or a family radio station, recount the details of the occasion. It was quite funny, actually. But I was amazed at how much I was writing about sex when I had not expected to be at that time. Lewinsky came a lot later. But Mr. Clinton's relations with women are very interesting. And I just do wonder whether he gets a free pass from a lot of people because he is, and particularly because his wife is, such a standard bearer of the American left, that he's sort of untouchable. But it's a long and complicated story. But I often do think that it's a question of
it's not
asking.
a point I'd considered before particularly. But you're right, because Trump, if we remember the comments of grabbing by the word I won't use,
Indeed,
there was outrage about that. I actually think a lot.
Well, quite rightly there was outrage.
Yeah, a lot of it was quite
Terrible,
justified.
maybe.
But Bill Clinton was accused of and proven to have done things far worse, but there's still a sort of lovable view of Bill Clinton, and you sort of brush it under the carpet.
The thing is that there is the issue of consent, and Clinton, and I also know this from personal experience, because he once turned it on me for a brief few seconds. His charm is extraordinary. I mean, birds off the trees is nothing. And there is this question of consent, and I have no doubt that he would argue that the relationships which he had were consensual. So there you are. But I just am puzzled by the way the question doesn't even seem to arise. I do think politics may be at the heart of it.
No, it's an interesting perspective. Listen, Peter, always good to talk to you. Well, I say that, I've only spoken to you once now, but hopefully many more times in the future. Peter Hitchens, Mail on Sunday columnist. Hey, I'm really interested to know your reaction to some of what Peter had to say there, especially on the David Amess story, and whether it was an absolutely horrific and just really unfeeling decision to not give him the last rites. How important is that? I mean, if you are someone who is of the Catholic faith, are you outraged by this? Do you feel that a part of it was the fact that there